Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Lee with the California State Association of Counties. I'm here today with the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency from the state of California, as well as representatives from the Department of Finance and the Departments of Housing and Community Development. We're here today to do a webinar on the provisions of SB 91, passed Friday, a week and a half ago, and extends eviction protections for tenants affected by COVID-19, as well as deploys $1.5 billion of funding for rental assistance around the state. So have a great lineup of panelists today and want to turn it over to them to give an overview of SB 91 and then hear your questions. So with that, I will go to Veronica with the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Chris. Chris and your team for putting this together. We're happy to be here to discuss SB 91 and the contents of that as it relates, like you said, to eviction protection extension and the state's rental assistance program. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we have a presentation to share with you that really just outlines the bill, what's in it, and then previews how we are putting up the rental assistance program. And perfect timing today, I have on the presentation with me Amy Wilson, our Deputy Secretary of Legislation, and also Lynn Von Koch-Lieber, our Deputy Secretary of Housing for our Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to get started.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Amy Wilson, Deputy Secretary here at our agency, and I'm going to walk you through SB 91, kind of the main chunks of it. So go ahead and let's go to the first slide. So this is kind of the overview of what the big elements of the bill. Obviously, we know that it was enacted at the end of last month with the governor's signature. So what it does is it extends the primary tenant and property owner protections that were put into place last fall under AB 3088. We'll go into those in just a minute, but that's kind of the first big element of the bill. It does add a few new protections for tenants related to, the eviction protections. And then it also includes some things related to the treatment of debt and the civil procedures that landlords may use regarding recovering debt. And then the third kind of section of the bill relates to the $1.5 billion that is flowing into California and creating the parameters for the state rental assistance program and how that money should be used by the state. So just taking a quick look at the eviction protections themselves. So the protections that were in place last year had been scheduled to expire at the end of January. And so this bill extends those same protections out through the end of June to June 30th, 2021. It makes use of the same eligibility and the same rules regarding those protections. So in other words, if there's a tenant that is experiencing a COVID-related hardship, very broadly defined, that makes them unable to pay their rent, then they can submit an attestation form that indicates that that is their situation and they're unable to pay their rent. And in doing so, they are protected from eviction during this period that goes through June 30th, 2021. And in addition to that, if they are able, if they maintain a 25% payment of monthly rent through this period, they cannot be evicted at the end of the period for non-payment beyond that 25%. In other words, and that can be paid monthly, it can be paid kind of in increments or as a lump sum at the end of June. But if they are able to maintain that level of payment, then they cannot be evicted come July 1 for non-payment of rent. Or, that they cannot be, an unlawful detainer action cannot be, initiated for non-payment. The debt, however, that 75% or whatever has not been paid, say the person is paying 50% or 60%, whatever the balance of that debt is, it accrues and the tenant still owes it to the landlord. It's just can't be the grounds for for any kind of unlawful detainer action. It converts to what's known as civil debt, and it can be recovered through the courts. And so that actually ties into the financial assistance program that I'm going to be just explaining in a minute. So there are a couple of other provisions that were actually added into the bill related. This is the third bullet on this slide, without going into too much detail, but it's about, prohibiting the use of fees, late fees from accruing and those types of things. There was some evidence that landlords were kind of heaping on the fees for late and overdue payments, and that is not the intention. That's not allowed. If you make your 25%, the balance is that 75%. It doesn't include additional fees. Treatment of security deposits and a few other elements like that. Very briefly, it also does extend to September 1st the same consumer protections that were in the prior bill, AB 3088. And basically what those are, they relate to forbearance requests that a homeowner or a borrower might make to their lender. And if that forbearance request is denied, then there are some like due process points that are added to the situation. The lender is required to provide in writing a detailed explanation as to what were the deficiencies in the request and what were the, why it occurred. And then it allows the borrower, the homeowner, to have 3 weeks to kind of address and correct any of the missing or incomplete or misrepresented information so that they have a second chance to be considered for forbearance. And I think, as you know, though, that most borrowers have their mortgages that are federally backed. And so the protections that come from the federal government during this period are broader relative to forbearance and actually encompass more Californians than these would relate to. But so that's really the main umbrella of coverage comes from the federal government relative to forbearance. So now just getting into that third chunk of the bill related to the rental assistance program. As Lynn is going to explain in a lot more detail, the federal government approved a significant amount of money to flow to states this year to work on stabilizing households. And the real focus of the federal act is targeting and stabilizing low-income households through the payment of the rental arrears, their rental arrears to landlords. So the federal law sets a number of criteria. It has a lot of detail, and we did our best to come up with a state program that would maximize the use of the money to achieve that goal of stabilizing households and focusing to the extent we can on the elimination of rental arrears and using the money to the best possible use throughout the state. Just very briefly, the eligibility for households as defined in the federal act and which is rearticulated in our bill is that households are at 80% or lower of area median income, and it prioritizes those that are under 50%. So we're talking about the very most kind of socioeconomically vulnerable households in the state. And then the state program proposes to or will compensate landlords 80% of the unpaid rent for their eligible for each eligible household that they have in occupancy within their premises for that period of April 1, 2020 through March 31 of this year. And so in accepting that 80% of unpaid rent, the landlord forgives any balance, and that alleviates the debt that is being held by the tenant and stabilizes their situation relative to their obligations to the landlord. And then if the landlord refuses that, does not want to participate in that arrangement, and they refuse that, and we're going to do all we can to have them participate and to see that this is a very good deal for them. If they choose, though, not to do it, then the eligible household can still participate in the program. And then our focus kind of slightly shifts focus, which is to stabilizing their household and spreading this money as actively or as far as we can by providing them with 25% of back rent owed for that same covered period in order for them to meet their obligations under the bill, so that they are stabilized and not vulnerable to that unlawful detainer action. So you can see it's kind of a pivot. Our first focus is to try to just to bring down that debt burden, and we think it's a good deal when landlords have the other option, which would be to spend a lot of time trying to chase down that debt through the civil courts, which is costly and time consuming, that they could instead participate in this program and get maybe not immediate, but very close, pretty quick relief at 80% of their unpaid rent. It's a pretty good deal, and we think and hope that they will participate in that program. If they choose not to, I know I'm repeating myself, but just for clarity, if they choose not to, then we're going to switch our focus to stabilizing as many families as we can by ensuring that they have that 25% obligation met. So that's kind of the general strategy that we have outlined for the rental assistance program. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lynn, who's going to walk you all through the design features of the program.
Good morning, and thank you, Amy, and thank everybody for joining us today to go through all of this material. And so we'll just jump right in. Veronica, next slide. Thank you. Okay. So just first a moment to go over the funding stream. So as Amy mentioned, the U.S. Treasury is providing through the Emergency Rental Assistance Program $2.6 billion to California in total. These funds are split roughly 55-45% between allocations that go directly to the state, and then also allocations that go from the Treasury to cities and counties with populations over 200,000. So really talking to this top box in the third column. So counties with populations under 200,000, in clear recognition that these are jurisdictions that are not getting that direct Treasury allocation, we took the state share and doubled it so that it would account for not receiving the direct federal allocation, to make sure that there was parity and equity at a population level. So that $150 million is going to be carved out right off the top from the state share, and then that will be reserved at the county level by population, and that will include the cities within the county. And so those numbers show up on the state reservation table, which is posted on our website, and I'll also show you what that looks like in just a second. So just following through this flow as well, for cities and counties with populations over 200,000, roughly $1.32 billion will go into the state reservation and that table, and that will follow the same federal structure where it's reserving as a share of population for cities and counties over 200,000. And then finally, just to help with the terminology, the direct allocation from the U.S. Treasury, which also is a share of populations for cities and counties over 200,000, will be called the U.S. Treasury direct allocation. Okay, so this gives you a view of what the reservation table looks like. And if you look at the bottom right-hand side of the slide, you can see the allocations for counties with populations that are under 200,000. So the way to read that is essentially the state estimation, and then there's a combined federal and state allocation, but without the direct federal, then it's just the sum of the state. So this table is on our website, and maybe I'll ask if that link can be dropped into the chat so that you can go in and make sure that you have full clarity on what your county may be receiving. So going to the program itself, so the US Treasury under the Emergency Rental Assistance Program was pretty specific in terms of what they wanted to see with these resources. So the bullets provide kind of a high level summary of what the Ewrap program is asking. So right off the top, no less than 90% may be used for direct financial assistance. And so that essentially gives us a pretty high percentage of funds that will be used and spent and provided as support to landlords and tenants. The criteria for eligibility, you have to have one of those three bullets. So the first would be qualifies for unemployment or experienced a reduction in household income. The second is demonstrates risk of experience of homelessness or housing instability. And the third is that a household income at or below 80% of area median income. It does call for a preference, so you have to be one of those three to be eligible. The Treasury does also require documentation and have listed essentially what that will look like. There is still some guidance expected from the Treasury to continue to hone in on those documentation requirements. There's a requirement that there not be non-duplication. So if a household or a landlord has received coverage for that same rental period through another federal rental assistance program, then they're not eligible to receive that same coverage twice. Treasury allows for up to 12 months of assistance plus an additional 3 months. And then if rental arrears have been demonstrated to be met, then future rental payments may be covered. The priority is for the application to be submitted by a landlord on behalf of an eligible household or by the eligible household itself. And in general, the Treasury is asking the payments be made directly to landlords and utility service providers. But if the landlord is not participating in the program, then funds may be paid directly to the eligible household. There are some pretty strict and tight timelines for expending and obligating these dollars. So the Treasury is asking that 65% of all the funds be obligated by September 30th. And at that point, the Treasury may claw back or reallocate funds that have been unobligated above the 65%. And then also all the funds need to be expended by December 31st. So as Amy mentioned, on top of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the state SB 91 added a couple additional requirements, which she outlined, but essentially it's the compensation structure that 80% coverage to the landlords, as well as prioritization through a series of rounds to be able to facilitate targeting and give time for landlords and tenants to be able to get in their applications and be able to successfully participate in this program. So we use the word conforming program when we talk about what the Ewrap and the SB 91 requirement is. And for the state administered portion, all of this will be done within the guidelines of that conforming program. And I think just for more information on that, we are posting guidelines today that will be that go into the program details in much more depth, and those will be available on our website as well. Okay, so when we were designing both when the legislature was designing the SB 91 elements, and then also when we then took that and designed a program to be able to administer and respond to the Treasury requirements as well as the SB 91, these were the kind of the key tenets that we were thinking about as we were developing the structure. So first of all, really the ability to centralize and standardize some of the policy elements like the compensation to be able to make sure that we have parity across the whole state and landlords and tenants are treated the same no matter where they're being served as much as possible. The second was in recognizing that this is a very administratively and labor intensive program. And so whenever we could to centralize and standardize that feature, but then really make sure that we can localize and personalize the outreach and deliveries program delivery, so that when a landlord or tenant is interacting with the program, they really have that local feel, even though the back end of the program would be largely supported by a central apparatus. The 80-20 split is really about maximizing the funds and making sure that we can do the most that we have with this limited resource. And stretching the resources to be able to serve more households. As Amy mentioned before, writing down the debt so that all parties can move forward together. And this can be seen as a permanent solution so that households are going to be more stabilized and be able to retain their business relationship moving through this pandemic. A lot of focus on integrity and accountability, and then also the really fine balance between needing to be, very, very on top of it for fraud prevention, but then also having to have some flexibility to be able to meet landlords and tenants where they are in terms of being able to verify eligibility and access the program requirements. The central system also helps us with the duplication of benefits requirement, and then provide standardization so that it's easier for the outreach partners and those who are helping applicants and helping applicants access the program be able to be trained on all the same information and not have to deal with many different applications and processes. Okay, so this is how we're setting this up. So the program delivery will be led by the Department of Housing and Community Development. And we have Jeff Ross on the call with us today from Housing and Community Development. We are standing up an advisory team that will be helping with, right up front, some of the really critical decisions around, the prioritization and outreach, and helping to set up some of the primary structures of the goals of the program. That will include participating jurisdictions like yourselves, as well as key stakeholders that have been very invested and have a lot to bring to the table. We are going to use a centrally administered rental assistance program using contracted partners. So we will bring in a full solution to be able to serve cities and counties under 200,000. This will also be offered to tribal governments who did receive federal allocations, as well as cities and counties over 200,000 that wish to opt into this central program. For cities and counties over 200,000 that want to self-administer, there is a block grant program through HCD, and they're going to be asked to administer their resources in a conforming fashion so that as much as possible across the state, we're having uniformity in how these resources are being let out. And then we've also brought on board an education and outreach campaign team that will be contracted implementers that will also be creating messaging content materials that can be used by the local partner network as well as the state to be able to reach out and ensure that this information is getting to the intended eligible recipients. Okay, so going into this solution. So for designing and building the central application portal and all of the pieces that are going to pull this together, we have brought on board LISC, who is a community development financial institution that has been helping us design how this all fits together, and then also really importantly is going to be establishing that state and local partner network. So you should all be receiving information in the coming day or two that's it shows how you can plug in, and then how also the community-based organizations and other local organizations that you think would help best serve your landlords and tenants can plug in and become part of the state and local partner network. So there will be both paid and unpaid roles, and we'll define all of that in kind of the application process to be able to quickly get involved in that. We should be rolling that out in the coming days. There will also be, as part of that process, the way for jurisdictions to be able to refer LISC to local partners that they think are well positioned to be able to be the kind of the boots on the ground technical assistance provider, outreach assistance to individuals in your jurisdiction. There will also be a coordination feature where LISC will be working with us to coordinate across all of these different elements to make sure that there's the feedback loop that comes from the state and local partner network, to make sure that the application process is working, to make sure that people are able to get the information that we're putting out and the content from the communications and outreach portion is responsive and reflective, and then continuing to do that in an iterative process over the full program so that we can reach our program goals. We're also working very quickly to develop a central application process that will include all of the application portals, the review, the verification, the processing of the awards, have a very robust support and call center that will be able to take applicant questions as they're moving through the process. And then also the structure for payment and data system to make sure that those funds are received by the intended recipient. All of this will then generate reports that will then help the state be able to write back to the U.S. Treasury and be able to confirm that we have executed this in accordance with the U.S. Treasury requirements. Okay, so just a little bit more about the education and communications piece. So this is set up so that we can have central messaging and communication content that's developed that really explains the Ewrap program as well as the SB 91 overlays, and is communicated in a way that's consistent and effective, and also can be centralized as much as possible to create the top line messaging, but then also give space and the toolkits capable to have local messaging kind of augmented to that information. So the idea being that a local jurisdiction could draw from that toolkit, but then add all the information that's really relevant to their population, to their county, to be able to communicate as much as possible to their target audience. This will be really critical for that local partner network of community-based organizations, non-for-profits, et cetera, that will be built into this partner network, where they too will have this toolkit of information that they can then add a layer to make it as localized as possible. Okay, and I think many of you have probably already been on some of the other webinars where we went through kind of the options that cities and counties over 200,000 have. But for counties that are under 200,000 and the cities that fall within them, we're going to provide service through the state central program that I just went through. So the way that will work is that the reservation table, that state distribution table, that amount will be reserved for your county, and then we'll work together to make sure that landlords and tenants who apply from within your jurisdiction get access to the funds that have been reserved specifically for your jurisdiction. Also, I want to note that we're going to work very quickly, and our goal as a state is be able to get to those obligation deadlines so that we could be in a position where if the U.S. Treasury is pulling back money from jurisdictions that did not expend those resources, the California to be able to receive the funds and be able to add money into the allocation table so that we could be able to meet any demand that has been unmet through the first $150 million going to the counties under 200,000. Okay, and this just gives you an overview of the timeline. I think some of these steps, so we're right now in this phase of, I guess we've done this a little bit longer, this end of January through today and tomorrow, where we're doing a lot of webinars. We're meeting one-on-one with anybody who reaches out and asks for more information or to talk about their unique situation. For the cities and counties that were larger than 200,000, they have an extra step where they were doing an expression of intent survey, and then they're also completing an expression of intent form that that will indicate to the state which option they're going to use for administration of their resources. For the counties that are below 200,000, I think just the key thing for you to be watching out for is the process to be able to refer any of your local partners to the local partner network, and that will be this week. And then also that we'll be rolling out the communications and outreach campaign starting this week as well. So we'll touch base and work through our process to set up that advisory council so that you all can have a seat at the table and be able to provide input and feedback into that content creation. And then really importantly, we will be working to get to that March 15th application deadline. so that on the 15th, your landlords and tenants in your jurisdiction are able to begin putting applications into the portal and be able to be considered for that first round of applications. And so I think that is my final slide. So over to Veronica. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Again, Veronica Harms. I'm just going to go over some of the resources that are currently available for cities and counties and your constituents. Back in September, we launched our Housing is Key campaign, which is in response to AB 3088, which provided the initial eviction protections. And so at that point, we developed this campaign to really provide resources to support tenants, landlords, homeowners, and community partners. And there are forms there that the landlord and tenant need to provide in order to be protected under now SB 91. We've been actively working to update this website, and a lot of the forms that are up there now have been updated. And if you visited the site earlier in the year, the forms may look the same, but rest assured they are updated. And moving forward, we'll continue to add information here as it relates to the rental assistance program. There's also information in English and Spanish and COVID assistance line that's available in 18 different languages. And two other resources that we have available is this geography of needs map, which really pinpoints and provides direction as to where those most in need reside in California so that we could target our communications and outreach to those most affected by the pandemic. And then we also have a partnership with 211, which provides information on AB 3088 and now SB 91. And we're going to work on expanding that partnership to include information about our state rental assistance program. So this is really a website to point people to get information. And as we develop the program, like I said, we'll be updating it regularly. So I encourage you to visit and check it out to see what's new. And with that, I will pass it over back to Chris and facilitate any question and answers. I'm going to be happy to answer them. Thank you, Chris.
Great, thanks, Veronica. Great presentation. I see we've got an initial question here in the chat. So if folks want to write questions in the chat or the Q&A box, you can go ahead and start doing those now. You can also use the raise your hand function and we can unmute you and call on you. So let's start off with Sharon's comment here in the chat. Can this rental assistance be used for families who are already receiving some form of housing subsidy, or does the receipt of any housing subsidy prevent someone from applying for this program?
So yes, technically, yes, these funds can be used in support of someone or a family receiving rental assistance from another source. But the key is primarily that would be like your housing choice voucher programs and similar programs being offered. It's really important to partner with the housing authority or the government agency that's providing that assistance to make sure that a recertification of income has occurred. And so if there are arrears or a gap in rental payments that have occurred between the time of loss of income and when that recertification happened, then that would be an eligible expenditure under the program to help pay for those arrears. Otherwise, the recertification, if it's able to be done relatively quickly, should cover that, and then there wouldn't be the need to actually use these funds to cover that gap.
Thank you. And maybe let's move on to Janelle Kelly's question in the Q&A. So small jurisdictions are very appreciative for the state to administer this robust and laborious program. Is there any local administrative allocation for outreach and or anti-duplication processes?
So we'll be partnering with LISC and the local partner network and really kind of developing a front end. And we're going to want to be partnering with the local jurisdictions to make sure that we are able to effectively outreach to the right community organizations so that that effort can be happening. So it is going to be one where we want to encourage as much participation as possible in making sure that we're targeting the most effective organizations in your community so that way we can reach out and actually assist the most vulnerable folks in the community as well.
Great, appreciate that. Looks like we've got another one here in the Q&A. Between now and March 15th, what should jurisdictions do with the Emergency Solutions Grant, CV1, I think that's the CARES Act prevention funds that do not cap rental payments but have no money for arrears? Should we spend it now?
So if that's the way that the communities are expending their funds, it is fine to continue to do so. What is critical is once we begin deployment of the rental assistance program, we will need to be able to coordinate on who's received assistance to date and who has not. And then that way we have an idea of what they are potentially eligible for, because what we need to be able to ensure is when we deploy the rental assistance funds, that there is no duplication of benefit. And so being able to coordinate very closely with you on how your program's been deployed, who's received that assistance, will allow us to continue to assist households in your community without risking their assistance through the rental assistance program and a duplication of benefits occurring.
Thank you. Don't see any right now. Maybe I'll throw out one. I know, I think Lynn touched on it a little bit, but you know, in the smaller counties where the state's going to be administering the program, questions that I've been seeing is, you know, how are we going to ensure we're going to get this aid out to our jurisdictions? I know you talked a little bit about, I think, the statewide advisory panel. Are there specific places where folks should plug in? Just check the website? I mean, I'm kind of wondering how formal that process is going to be, and then how much it's going to be just based on sort of ad hoc conversations as, you know, community groups or members of the Board of Supervisors or City Council raise those. So maybe you could talk a little more about that process.
Thanks, Chris. Great question. So for the advisory board, we are putting pen to paper now in terms of how that will be structured and managed. And then we will have an open and transparent process to make sure that those who want to participate are able to get a seat at the table. So we'll be sharing that information on our Housing is Key website, as well as hopefully passing it through our partners at CSAC to get it into your hands as well. So I do see that there's a question in the chat that I'd like to answer as well. And it's, where should I direct tenant and landlord inquiries about Ewrap? So I think that's an important time to plug the Housing is Key website. So housingiskey.com is going to be our central place where you can go now. As was mentioned earlier, the forms and everything related to the SB 91 are all up and available. And as you'll begin to see more information as everything goes live on the rental assistance program that has a direct link to the application portal, that has the program guidelines, that has all the information that you'll need to plug in the partner network. So that's the one-stop shop where everything is going to be. In addition to that, we'll do some direct targeted outreach through partners like CSAC, as well as LISC will be doing some very specific targeted outreach as well to build up partnerships that reflect the fund distribution structure, looking at where the need is across the state. So it'll be kind of a two-part, but you can always go to housingiskey.com, and that will be the central repository for all the information on this program.
Great, and we will look forward to pushing out that information to the counties as it's available. A couple of questions from Brendan Phillips in the Q&A. So if private money is in play for rental assistance, are those pools of funds also needing to be counted in the state system? And I think the second one is more straightforward to answer. How are documentation requirements going to address undocumented people? Sure,
great questions, Brandon. So for private money, no, that's completely separate. So that would be something that would stay within the structure that it's currently being administered or would be administered in the future. And that would be separate from the state program, which is using the U.S. federal money to administer. In terms of the documentation requirements to address undocumented, so the Treasury does not require any information about citizenship or residency. So we are going to follow that structure, and in the application and part of the conformity on how the block grant program is structured as well, there will be no questions about citizenship or citizenship or residency. It will be linked just to the physical address of the rental, where the rental arrears have accrued.
Excellent, thank you. Don't see any more questions in the Q&A or the chat right now. One I've asked before, and I think is worth highlighting, is sort of how do you envision reallocation working between jurisdictions, and what are the assurances that folks have in various communities that their community members are going to have a chance at accessing the aid before it's reallocated to other parts of the state that may or may not have, higher demand for the funding?
That's a great question, and I think it's been really important for us as we've been thinking through this program structure to, as much as possible, keep those pots of money in their originally intended places. When the allocations are done, they were really based off of a population model, and we know that some populations some individuals are harder to reach, and it may take more time. So what we are doing through these 3 rounds is we're setting up a structure where it gives us the time to be able to, through that process, reach the hardest to find households and tenants, or give time to those who might take more time to get their applications in, to be able to work as much as possible to keep those original allocations set within the communities that they're in. The real issue is that the Treasury reserves the right to pull back unobligated funds, and so we do have to have a point where if we have not been able to demonstrate and get to the point where we can allocate within a jurisdiction, where to avoid losing those resources at the state level, then we would reallocate them. And I think the process by which that will happen is still really being developed. It's part of us thinking through kind of the real mechanisms of how the structure works. But I would imagine that it would be something along the lines of, as we're receiving all these applications and we're vetting them and we're testing for eligibility, and we're kind of we're ranking them related to the prioritization standards. There may be jurisdictions that have oversubscription, and so we would look to those essentially waiting lists, I would think, to then reallocate the funds so that we can spend in an area that has demonstrated need and where applications had already been submitted. But again, really want to emphasize that's not the goal. It's the fail safe so that California can keep these critical resources in state.
Thanks, Lynn. And I do want to highlight, CSAC appreciates the initial reservation of $150 million for the smallest 30 counties. That sounds small in the context of a $2.6 billion program, but it is actually a little bit higher than the share of those counties have of the statewide population. So definitely appreciate the effort to ensure that all parts of the state are eligible for the aid that their communities need. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A or the chat, and don't see any hands raised. So we'll do a last call for questions. If anyone has something that hasn't been discussed yet that they'd like to raise, please do so now. But also please feel free to email me, clee@counties.org, after the webinar. Housingiskey.com has a lot of the information as well, but I'm always happy to help connect folks with our panelists here today. So seeing no questions and no hands raised, I just want to thank everyone for their time this morning, and look forward to continuing to work together. And thanks to the administration, BCSH, HCD, and Department of Finance for your willingness to present today.
Thank you for inviting us and for bringing everyone together, Chris.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.